Eleanor Buck Wolf. Eleanor, we appreciate your letting us come to your home here and in front of this historic hearth. Hear a little something from you about Christmases past, perhaps. This house, I understand, was built probably around 1667.
As far as we know, it's very hard to trace back an old house that's been moved a couple of times.
Yeah, so this is not its original site, but this building has been around for something like 325 years, and you and your husband Dick are still living here.
Yeah, it's not quite that long.
400 Orchard Avenue, and it's just a marvelous place. And this hearth of yours, this great big open hearth, used for heat and cooking and everything else in the old days. Actually, it's a famous one because it was featured in a calendar, a 2001 calendar of American hearths, and it's right there on the cover, this very hearth that we're sitting in front of. And it's seen many, many years of Christmases and other times. Eleanor, you you're 92 years old now, and you have contributed perhaps more to Wethersfield than anybody I can think of, and you're a multi-talented artist. You paint, you draw, you write, you do quilts and quilting and all kinds of artwork. We just had an exhibit in the Keeney Center of some of your works. But tonight we're interested particularly in Christmas time and what you might remember of some Christmases past here in Wethersfield.
Mm-hmm. Well, Christmas started for us when the teacher who came once a week to the Northbrook Schoolhouse brought along a sketch of Santa Claus, and we colored in the sketch. That was our artwork for the week. And then probably the next thing that happened was the Sunday school party that the church gave. It was held in the old chapel, which has since gone. It was north of the church. And the big room was open to the rafters, so they had plenty of room for a very big Christmas tree, usually a hemlock. And when we gathered, we sang carols, and of course we had ice cream and cookies. And then we listened very hard, and in the distance came the jingle of sleigh bells. And in the door came Santa Claus. I mean, he was really a fat, jolly old self. And Santa Claus gave out a gift to all the boys and girls, usually maybe a coloring book or a book of fairy tales or something minor like that. But the exciting thing for us was that as we left, we were given a box, about this size box of Christmas ribbon candy. I don't know if they make it anymore.
I remember Christmas ribbon candy.
That was special. It was all curled up.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. In my family then, on a nice cold wintry day near Christmas, Father and my older brother and I went up to Talcott Mountain. The family owned property, forest property on Talcott Mountain in Bloomfield.
Where the High Blind Tower is up there?
Yes, north of that.
North of that.
Mm-hmm. And so they picked the most beautifully shaped small hemlock and cut it for Christmas, wound a rope around it.
You cut a wild tree down, growing out in the woods, and brought that home yourselves.
Yeah, all wound up in rope and attached to the running board of the touring car, because we don't have running boards anymore. And left outdoors until the night before Christmas, the day before Christmas. And then it was brought in, set up, and we trimmed it. Earlier, we had a Ford. Before that, a motorette, a three-wheeled automobile. But they were always put up for the winter on blocks in the barn because the roads were not plowed.
The cars were.
The cars were plowed.
They used to sing Jingle Bells, the song Jingle Bells, on a one-horse
open
sleigh. Did you ever ride in a one-horse open sleigh over the snow?
Yes. Our cousin Edward Buck, who lived next door here, had a wonderful old sleigh, one-horse sleigh. and he used to take us out for rides, and it was great fun.
Yeah, yeah.
We didn't make much of Christmas dinner. The exciting things were the gifts under the tree. We didn't have the plastic or the stuff that the kids have nowadays. We didn't get tons of toys. We usually got a big toy. It was like, for me, it was always a doll, or doll carriage, a wicker doll carriage, or some doll furniture. And my brothers, it might be a flexible flyer sled.
Flexible flyer sled.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That was the famous kind.
I can remember them. We used to go to Goodwin Park to slide with them.
Of course, we had the shore of the
right
Cove.
down here, right to the Cove.
Right.
Was the Cove frozen over at that time?
It sometimes was, and sometimes we had to stop before we got onto it.
Could you go out and skate on the Cove when it was frozen over?
Oh yes, we did that. In fact, we had a double ripper. Well, it was more than a double. It held 20 kids, and it was kept in my cousin Ned's barn. And when the sliding was very good, and when the Cove was good and frozen, we'd take it over to Captain Buck's Hill, which is the best one on this bank, the western bank of the Cove, and have a party. We would have Ned's horse, who would be stationed at the bottom of the hill. We'd go down the sleigh and going almost across the Cove, almost over to the warehouse.
Horse would pull you across the Cove?
Mm-hmm. Almost to the warehouse. And then we'd pull it back to the bottom of the bank, and Ned's horse would pull it up the bank. It had you probably don't remember, the trolley car of bell.
Oh,
it
yes.
was a big brass bell with a hammer that the conductor would hit, or motorman would hit, and that was put on the back of the double ripper. So somebody sat in the back and clanged the bell, because you couldn't steer it. If somebody was in the way, it would be too bad. So
the bell would warn some people out of the way.
Right.
Well, I've always lived in Wethersfield. The first ancestors came over in about 1640, and a farming family. Been here ever since.
Now, did they farm just around the Cove or in other places in Wethersfield?
I think they started out around near the center of town, and then moved up to this section in about the middle 1700s. Well, some of the early names, they weren't necessarily relatives, but many of the same old families still live in Wethersfield.
Wells are some of the names, the early
Yes.
relatives. There were a lot of relatives, I know.
Go back far enough, we're all related, I guess.
Yes, even the Grizzles are in there too, which Grizzleville is named after, because
Yes,
many of the Griswold family settled over in Griswoldville.
right.
And so they finally named it Griswoldville. They basically did farming, but they also did fishing too. Am I right?
Yes, there was a alewife fishery on the Wethersfield Cove from the early days, and that went up until the cove became so polluted that there were no more fish. That was in the early 1900s. Fortunately, now the fish are coming back.
Your relatives were the Buck relatives, which of course were the farmers of Wethersfield. And tell us something about the farming that you remember around town.
Well, Wethersfield is noted for its onions, and we were still growing onions when I was young. They were planted in the spring, onion sets. In fact, the air was so fragrant in the spring that as you came in from Hartford, you could smell the fragrance of the onion fields. When I was young, we had 7 trains, passenger trains a day on this Hartford to Saybrook line, and 2 freight trains a day.
2 freight trains a day, wow.
So it was a very active route. It's too bad, as a matter of fact, that it isn't going today and taking some of the traffic off the highways. This was a steamboat, the Hartford and the Middletown, and they went daily from Hartford to New York. And we often would go up and get the boat in Hartford and go down to Middletown, get off, go to a movie in Middletown, and then ride the trolley car back to Wethersfield.
Oh, the trolley car.
The trolley car went on the partway on the railroad tracks, and because they were just through the country, they went very fast. In fact, we swayed back and forth as you went on the trolley, which we enjoyed at that time.
And so
the movie was a silent movie.
A silent movie.
Uh-huh.
On the...
in Middletown.
From Middletown to Hartford. Wow. Can you tell us something about this ritual at Thanksgiving with the Buck homestead?
Well, it was started by my father and his two brothers when they were at Yale. And they decided it would be fun to see how much each of them gained at Thanksgiving dinner. So they would weigh out on the barn scales before and then weigh afterwards, see how much they gained. And it became sort of a family tradition, so that at Thanksgiving, everyone would get weighed. And even the babies, when they were born, would come in with their weight.
The babies, too. Wow.
So it was kind of a family history, and see who was at Thanksgiving dinner and who came in, who were new, the brides and grooms and so forth.
Now, what are your recollections during the Depression?
Well, I was in college for a lot of that, so I didn't suffer the way a lot of people did, although every family felt it somewhat, I'm sure.
I think you said you remember people selling pencils?
On Hartford Main Street would be people sitting at the curb selling pencils or apples.
Apples?
Uh-huh. Yeah. And I think it affected a lot of people in whether they went to college or not. Their families couldn't afford it, even though college tuitions are quite different today.
Eleanor Buck graduated from Mount Holyoke College in 1931.
But then you got out of college and you worked in Hartford somewhere?
Yes, I worked for a doctor in Hartford. Ear, nose,
as
and
a
throat
secretary?
specialist. No, as a nurse.
As a nurse. And then after that, you went...
I went through Hartford Hospital School of Nursing.
So you're a registered nurse?
Yes.
At Hartford Hospital?
Uh-huh. I'm Eleanor Wolf, and I'm standing at the site of the North Brick Schoolhouse. It was a small red brick one-room school until the late 1800s, when a second floor was added. On the second floor, the wooden second floor was added with a tower. I went to the school, the first, second, and part of the third grade, around 1914 until the new school, the new Charles Wright School, was built in 1917. This is a model of the North Brick School, the way it was when the addition was added. This side was on Knott Street, the main schoolroom where the big windows are, and the little entry hall back at the separate window. Back here was the combination of woodshed and a little corridor leading to the girls' outhouse. The boys' outhouse was on this side. The boys had to go from the outside to get into theirs. We only had to go through a long, dark, smelly corridor to get to ours. But essentially, it was one room downstairs and one room upstairs. There were at least 4 grades and possibly more, because at the time that the Charles Wright School was built,
the school population was growing. We did have a new time a superintendent who believed in mottos, and so every day, every week, a different motto was put up on the blackboard. Like
To remember, to memorize.
you know, give to the world the best you can, and the best will come back to you. One of the I remember.
Oh, I didn't have to do that.
We ought to do something like that today. That's
Because we had art once a week, and that I don't think there was a special teacher. I think it was the classroom teacher. It may have been special, but what we were handed out sheets of paper with a drawing on it. Maybe it was a flower, or maybe something like that. And if you colored within the lines, you got a good mark. Excellent. But the whole object was to color within the lines. But I do remember one special one that I saved, and that was a postcard with a tree and a limb going on it. And we were brought pussy willows to school, and we put 3 little pussy willows on the limb with a tail underneath each one, and then written below was, "Who will sing my Easter carol, Pussy Willow?" It's cute. My teacher was upset because I sucked my thumb. And she tried to stop me, but it was impossible to do because it was the only way I could get back at my brother. He didn't like it. So by teasing him, by sucking my thumb, I wasn't going to give it up, let alone that it tasted good. So one day she put some stingy stuff on my thumb and tied her handkerchief around it. And of course I promptly licked off the stingy stuff and threw the handkerchief away. So she didn't try that
You didn't
again.
help it.
No, she didn't want to lose all her handkerchiefs. We had the girls had nothing like knickers or jeans or anything. We wore dresses always, not skirts, but dresses. Usually, if we were ordinary, we had, and our parents had a dressmaker in the fall to make our clothes. We had panties, bloomers to match the dresses. The real elegant children had cloth underwear, real silk panties. That was special. But most of us, and we had long stockings, either brown or black,
and a garter belt,
and high
and a little
shoes.
undershirt with buttons on.
A camp, they called it. A camp.
was the prison near the school at that time?
Prison was across.
It was across the street. I was there at that time.
Where the motor vehicles is, yes. The prison was the prison was an asset. The trustees would take care of the lawn, be out with the guards, working on the grass and keeping it immaculate. It was like a park. And we always, on our way to school, we'd talk to the trustees. Guards didn't bother. They were probably pretty innocuous people that were let out.
Sure.
But then also the chaplain lived in a little a very attractive brick house just outside the prison, down toward the east end of the prison. And the chaplain's daughter made lollipops. And I had a commission one year one day I would take orders for they were wonderful lollipops. They were about 3 inches in diameter, maybe half an inch thick. They were gorgeous and all home real flavors. Butterscotch and wild cherry and chocolate.
How much did they cost?
They cost 5 cents a piece.
The school children, you take orders to
I'd
the
take
school?
orders one day, and then I'd get them, and the next day I'd bring them
To school.
to school, and they paid 5 cents, and I got a penny. I got a penny for that.
You were a business lady way back.
And it lasted until the parents got a little upset, I think.
Can we get ready for Carol's visit? She breaks for the
The supervisor has just walked into the room, so I'll be quiet. I'll send you in the corner.
Well, I hope you raise your hand. I'll try and talk loud. I know I don't have a very carrying voice. I hope you can hear me. My daughter told me about a minister at her church who wears a hearing aid, and he said that he talked about a man whose family complained because he wasn't hearing everything they said. So they got him to go to a doctor and get a hearing aid, and he went back to the doctor to check up on the hearing aid, and the doctor said, well, how's it working? How does your family like it? Well, he said, I haven't told them, but he said, I've changed my will 3 times. Well, anyway, I come from a long family of savers, and I've added to that Yankee adage, which you probably all know, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. My addition is, and never, never throw it out. In fact, I had one relative whose house we closed up in Lowell, and we came across one drawer, and it was filled with little tiny pieces of string. And a note in the drawer said, string, too short to use. So anyway, maybe 10 years ago, when I found this box in the attic of the Buck house, tied up with string, and I knew somebody thought it was worth saving, and we discovered it was accounts taken from the North Brick School. And so I turned it over to the Historical Society, and in the last couple of weeks or so, our committee, Ruth Willard and Wanda Donahue and I, have been going over those accounts. Well, they are done up usually a year at a time in slips of paper, maybe this size to bigger, and a few big sheets, usually done up, as I say, for a year at a time. The earliest one is 1809, and the latest one is 1890. So that's a pretty good record of all those years of the school. There seems to be no rhyme or reason of why they paid what they did. The men, the salary ranged from, $15 a month to $22 or a month. There was one that actually got $25, and that was toward the end, $25 a month. But they paid them in such irregular ways. It wasn't, you didn't get your pay at the end of a week, at the end of a month. It might be 3 or 4 months before you got paid. And I seem to wonder what these people did in between times. But I suppose they had credit at the grocery stores, and they just, waited until they got the money. But it was certainly different from today. But the different thing is that for the women, they got paid from $5 a month to the highest I found was $11 a month. Compare that with the $23.50 for the men. And they probably did better housekeeping too.
This has been quite a year for Abigail Chester Webb, and we decided that we would give a conservation medal. In December of 1967, Mrs. Wolf was one of the 10 founding members of the Great Meadows Conservation Trust. The group was incorporated in March of 1968, and they haven't stopped yet. She's also been active in establishing Wintergreen Woods, Cove Park, and the Wethersfield Nature Center. I heard a rumor that the Trust Operation Committee meetings have all been held in Mr. and Mrs. Wolf's home, located on a rise above the Cove. That's 27 years of meetings. It gives me great pleasure to present the DAR National Conservation Medal to Mrs. Eleanor Wolf. Would you like to come up?
Eleanor's husband, Richard, is in the foreground here in the gray suit.
And I won't try and pin this on. I'll probably pin both of us if I do. But that is the National Conservation Medal.
Thank you very, very much. I'm honored to
Why did
be
you pin it on?
to be honored by this association. And it certainly is not, I couldn't have accomplished anything that I've done without the backing and the help of all you people in your wonderful organizations. Peg thought you might be interested in some of the problems that we're facing right now. And I have a map here. I like to map. Just a minute. You'll recognize this as a map of Wethersfield. As long as people can go along I-91 or fly over the river, they see this wonderful open space, level, flat, no buildings on it, that is our meadows, that it's a floodplain. I'm afraid that as long as they're going to see that open land, developers are going to develop it. The present problems we have now are with the Department of Environmental Protection, which is sort of belying its name because it wants to put a big boat launch under the Putnam Bridge. Let's see, where am I? Here is a bridge, and just south and under the bridge is where they want to put this large, in fact it would be the largest boat launching area in the state. We don't know how that's coming out. But undoubtedly, at the time they do set a public hearing, the town will be notified, and perhaps we can get some of you people speaking against it.
At that service, I made an allusion to two longtime members of our church family. If you remember the insert, it goes way back to 1923, when there were two ladies who joined the church at that time. The women are 77-year members, and of course, they are Eleanor Wolf, Kay Cody. So anyhow, you know who our speaker is today. It's Eleanor Wolf. Did you ever hear in the Penis column, Schultz, about the little redhead girl? Yes. Would you believe that at one point in time, Eleanor Wolf was a redhead?
You all know that story.
Oh, I never heard it until just today.
I'm sure most of you do. Well, tell us. Family had a birthday party for me when I was 90. So I got my granddaughter, who worked in the cosmetic department, to dye my hair red. When we got to the party, Dick went in first. He said, I picked up a woman on the way who looked like she'd be fun to have here. We got her a good evening. But we said, oh, this poor old mother, isn't that awful? You know, one of my first rock ancestors in Wethersfield was appointed as the town grave digger. So I thought it was quite appropriate for me to do a little digging of my own. Most of what I've dug up is from Sherman Adams in ancient Wethersfield. It's fun to read footnotes, especially in that book. One of the ministers
was when he was appointed, didn't have a wife, and he felt he needed a wife badly. So he went to Northampton to visit Reverend Stoddard, his friend, and told him his problem. And the Reverend Stoddard took him into the next room, introduced him to his daughters, Mary, Esther, Christiana, Rebecca, Hannah, and I can't remember the others, Sarah. So Stephen Mix went in and he picked out Mary. And Mary said, well, you know, this really, I'm not used to this idea. It's such a responsible position. Will you please give me a little time? Stephen said, that's fine. I'll go and smoke a pipe with your father. So after he smoked his pipe, he came back, and Mary said, well, I really would like a little more time. He said, all right, you can write to me. So a little later, he got a letter. The date, Mr. Stephen Mix, yes, Mary. Couldn't be used, which I got hold of. And I thought to myself, my first ancestor was one of the first given a place to cut a carpenter, a place for cutting in a sawmill. But maybe he sawed out and plank that came from. Then it was used in an early church at the wall. So maybe some of my ancestors leaned against the board. And then it was used in the floor of our present church. So some more ancestors walked on it. And we put a metal stand under it, and now we eat off it. In the early part of the 1800s, the next generations will remember that not only is this a great church spiritually and for what we do for the people of the church and others, but it's a great church historically. It's unique in New England and perhaps all over the East. It's the only brick church outside of Boston of this period. And I hope you'll all be very particular and careful about keeping it in as pristine historical condition as we can. Thank you very much.
In addition to her many civic contributions to the town and community of Wethersfield, Eleanor Buck Wolf was an incredibly talented artist in a wide variety of media. In August of 2001, the Historical Society mounted a special exhibit of her works in the Wethersfield Museum at the Keeney Memorial Cultural Center so that the public could have the opportunity to see and appreciate some of the many different pieces of art which she had produced over the years. These included exceptionally fine paintings of both outdoor and indoor scenes, particularly locales in her hometown, such as the Wethersfield Yacht Club, Main Street with the red brick Keeney Center, the old railroad station on Church Street, and of course the warehouse on Wethersfield Cove. Some of her oil paintings were inspired by quotations from the Bible and completed as part of a church art project with a highly imaginative interpretation of an outstretched scene from nature. Eleanor confessed to loving fabrics and became a very competent clothes designer. She always welcomed the opportunity to sew a new frock for some special occasion. She made quilts, too, in a variety of challenging and brightly colored patterns for friends and family. Eleanor created needlework for napkins and even sewed handbags for sale at I. Miller's exclusive shop in Hartford. we are fortunate to be able to enjoy time and time again the 7 books which Eleanor wrote and illustrated about her life in Wethersfield and the world around her. She willingly illustrated countless programs and brochures for the many local organizations that she served. Perhaps the most priceless heirloom is the early bedspread that brings to life in colored threads the story of her ancestral dwelling place, the home that the Demings built. This old house was moved from one location to another more than once, using different conveyances. It had to be pulled across the railroad tracks to get it over to Hartford Avenue. Perhaps the most impressive mood portrayed on this bed hanging was the first one, when the house was rolled along on massive logs. And it took a team of 4 yokes of oxen to haul the building to its new site. Now hanging in the hallway of the Wethersfield Museum is the large and colorful quilt that Eleanor designed with a distinct diagonal color pattern, and which was sewn with the help of a number of other local women to benefit the Wethersfield Nature Center. Their needles and bright threads were used to create a host of creatures, great and small, including intricate portrayals of plants, animals, birds, and bees, all found within Wethersfield's borders. Among her favorite subjects were the little red foxes that often crossed her yard. Eleanor, in addition, was a woodcarver and small-scale constructionist, making this cutaway model of her own house on Hartford Avenue. She wanted to preserve for future generations, particularly the vision of the great open hearth, which represented the warm heart both of her home and of her own long and wondrous life.
Well, this has been wonderful. We thank you so much for sharing some of these memories with us, and we hope that you'll be able to enjoy many more Christmases here in this wonderful place.
Yeah. We're very lucky to be here this long.
Yes.